in the history of the United States Census Bureau, you were allowed to mark more than one box. And that's how we found out. However, what multi-ethnic children will find is, which group do I belong in? And your work, if you happen to be doing work with people that are multi-ethnic, they don't have to choose. And you need to tell them that. You need to say, we have Latinos, we have Asians over here, and then we have a group over here that are multi-ethnic. So they don't have to go, which side of me goes here, which side of me goes over here. I also am getting tired of people going, well, I'm 10% of this, 5% of this, and 4% of this. What I often say is, so where? I also would like to encourage European Americans in this room to write to the United States Census Bureau and say, I am not white. I have a European background, or many other backgrounds. I would like to be able to check that box besides white. Why? Because other people of color don't get that opportunity. We have to be identified who we are. I also think that it creates a mythology that white is synonymous with American and then hence synonymous with human being. I don't know how many white students say in my classes and I cross this country is, I don't have a culture. I'm just an American. Well, that's not true. They have a long heritage that goes back. There's a new mythology going on in our colleges, and this is what happens when you don't talk about ethnicity. There are students in schools that are saying this, my mama is Italian, my father is German, but I'm neither one. Now please tell me how they ended up not to be either one of those. And this is the new criteria, or this is the new answer they're giving. I am not Italian and I am not German because I've never been there. And I'm going, wow, so you just skipped it. And for those of you that are nodding your heads, I need you to hear, because I think that it is very hard for white students to own their backgrounds. At the same time, in this entire political presidential election, we have not asked Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump their European heritage. It has not even occurred to us to ask them. And what, for those of you who have lived as long as I have, when John F. Kennedy shared he was both Catholic and Scottish or Irish, it became a huge issue. So he became the last one to share it. And I really want to remind Donald Trump that Ted Cruz is an American, because Canada is part of the Americas. Or as I walked up to a professor at Harvard who said to me he was Peruvian, and I walked up to him and I said, what an honor to meet another American. And he cried. Because he said in this country we do not consider them to be Americans. And imagine the ugly American athlete that went to Rio and said, I was in a room and there were only 3 Americans. Because they haven't been taught that they are only one of the Americas. Yes, and you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say that the largest group that we might, some of us might not belong to now, but we will belong to very likely before we die, is people with disabilities. The CDC has determined that if you live beyond 30 and you don't have a disability, 89% of us will get a disability of significant disability for more than 6 months before we pass on. It's a subculture that we all will become a part of.
And by the way, how many of you think that Kevin is talking about himself? Yes.
I know I have a disability.
You see, when people speak with such intensity, they're talking about themselves too. And sometimes we don't even look. Part of mindfulness is to notice how he said that. And we don't even show the curiosity looking at him when he talks. You could see it when he said it. And that's why when I was having dinner with folks last night, I could see the intensity when some people talked about things. So sometimes you need to watch when some people ask a question, it more than likely has something to do with their own lives and what's important. And let's give a hand to Kevin for bringing this up. I also want to tell you that today we had lots of issues brought up, and the reason why you hear such intensity is because we don't talk about it. We don't bring it up. And by the way, racism is not just black and white people. And so it's a larger spectrum to talk about. Whew. Sometimes it's hard to have a break in between because people are talking to me all the way through. So I just want to take a breath for a moment. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to turn to the person on your left and right, behind you and in front of you. And this is what I'd like you to do. Don't do it yet. Some of you are all ready to swivel. Is when you learn to say hello to people, take your time. You see this? You really hold the person's hand and feel it and look at them. Because sometimes we do it without feeling. Ray and I were talking about how we somehow distance ourselves from everyone. And we also talked about the land, that we become disconnected to the land just to use it rather than to realize the more we hurt the land, the more we also hurt ourselves. And if you learn how to be with people, you treasure every part of your life, what you touch on land. Today, when I looked out at the trees and I was listening to the storyteller, how many of you saw the leaves falling down and how beautiful they were and the light? It was magical. Not just her words, but the way she said it. Not just the way she said it, but with heart. And the way she bent. And the way she moved. And the way you looked at her. And the way she connected with you. All of that was all operating. And then I looked at all the people who were looking at her. I was trying to take it all in as I watched. And that's part of the work, is not just to be here by yourself, as Kevin's saying, but what else do you see in the world? Is it only what concerns us, or do we see other people? And do they have to scream and yell and raise their hands before we pay attention? It's exactly what a Black Lives young man said to me is, why do I have to yell for you to hear me? Why do I have to be belligerent before you'll even pay attention? And I think it's really true. And I wanted to say to Hillary and Bernie Sanders when they were not interrupted, but the Black Lives Matter people said something, to just take a breath. Listen to them. And don't just stand back, but get closer. And then share. I was waiting for Bernie and I was waiting for Hillary to say, it's kind of scary when you jumped in when I was talking. All of my life I've been told that's disrespectful. But what I'm realizing is it must hurt so badly that you need to tell me. And I need to tell you, when I look at you as a group, I live in a bubble. I grew up in a very different world as a white woman in a fairly wealthy family. I went to school in some of the best schools. I've been protected what you've had to go through. And I want today to come to learn, because I've been so protected from this. And even though it scares me, and I don't know exactly what to say, I want to find out your life and why you're here today and how I could help. And why do I say it in those ways? Because when they faced off the black leaders, John F. Kennedy, he said, don't march now. This is not the right time. Let me work with the Senate. You're going to just upset the senators. This is just not the right time. And Andrew Young looked at John F. Kennedy and he said, Mr. President, it's not if we're coming to Washington, D.C. for the march. We are already in the streets. And then Robert F. Kennedy tried to interrupt, and they said, Robert, shut up and sit down. We want to tell you what our lives are like. And Robert F. Kennedy says it was the turning point of his life, because he sat down and just listened. And like Mahatma Gandhi, when he got off the stage, they said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to see and hear and learn about the people of India. I want to find out their lives, what I don't know. And that's exactly what Robert F. Kennedy did. He walked into our neighborhoods. He wanted to hear what was going on. And he was ashamed that he worked for McCarthy when he asked and agreed to a wiretap on Martin Luther King. So we had to come a long ways, for those of you who followed politics. And why I became from a lawyer to a teacher was because when Robert F. Kennedy was shot, and it came very close to Martin Luther King, I didn't want to become a lawyer anymore. Because I believed that I could have made a change and difference. The Camelot I believed in. And so I changed majors when Robert F. Kennedy was shot in California. And I also wanted that dream again that I felt so excited that the Kennedys brought into us, that Martin and Malcolm were talking about. And I still want it. And for those of us who lived in that era, God, it was an inspiring time. And I think it breaks our hearts to see how much we fought for, being slowly dismantled. And yes, we still have a voting rights problem in America. And so today when we begin, thank you for having get us started, Kevin. And thank you for many others of you who spoke up today. Today, this conversation is about difference, isn't it? You see, a woman said to me in one of my workshops, can you come and help us work on similarities? And I said, I've been working on that my whole life. Not similarities to me, but how to be with you, for you to be comfortable. I'd like us today to realize that we're afraid of difference. I think we celebrate it, but we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what to do with people who are different. Your neighbor, your city is going to change whether you like it or not. This is the first year, for the very first time, that there were more babies of color than white babies in the history of this country. It is changing. You can either embrace it or be scared of it. You can either find a secure little neighborhood, or you can open your neighborhood and get to know each other. Last night I was very, very gracious to be able to be at a beautiful home last night. Steve and Karen. And it was a beautiful neighborhood. But what I said to everyone is, would you have felt safe if it was 80% black? Would you have felt it was safe if it was 80% Latino? Or did you only feel safe because it was 100% or 80% white? And it's important to check in with yourself, like, would I be scared? And it's okay to say, I'm scared, and then work from there. Can you hear that? It's okay to say, I'm scared, and then find out where you got the fear from. Remember today, you paired up with somebody you didn't know. You might have looked at them from a distance. And so today, we are going to continue that journey. Not just because I'm talking about it, but because I want you to start meeting someone and start the conversation of, and the question is going to be today is, when did you first discover you were different? How many of you, if you'd be willing to tell me, would you mind sharing, what is the definition of diversity? For you.
The definition of diversity for me, in the
Oftentimes people repeat the question so they can think of what to say.
I wasn't doing that. It works better than lots of ums. I would say it's a difference in experiences and a difference in that word that I can't think of right now.
So basically to be able to hear a difference of opinion or a different opinion. And for you, Ray, what is diversity to you? Would you mind standing, Ray? I'm sorry, I would have done that with you too. Would you mind standing? Because I know it's hard to look at someone with their back. Would you mind turning around? Then you only have 2 rows with your backs to. I like this guy.
I'm going to answer, I guess, in a different way. I read these words a while back, and they're very true. You know, they say, you know, it said, I was not born an American, but America was born on my land. You know, indigenous people have accepted peoples from all walks of life, from all parts of the world, because they knew what diversity was. They knew how to welcome people. Now, that didn't turn out so well for them, but they knew it, and they've never forgotten that. So I think it's important to remember that America was born here. It never existed, but these lands have always existed.
God, I can almost write down every word he says. Anybody else want to tell me would you say diversity is for you? Yes. Do you mind
So
standing?
I'm just going to say what I first thought when you said, what is diversity? And what came to mind was, how many kinds of birds are there? How many kinds of trees? How many kinds of fish? That there are these things, and they're all diverse from each other. And so that was my thought, was every single little thing may look exactly the same. It may look just a tiny bit different, but it is very diverse.
And by the way, you could have 5 kids and they're all different. They could both have the same parents and they both look at something totally different, right? So, but it's beautiful to have that, isn't it? So, here we go again. Everybody stand. Not everyone can stand, so those, stand if you can, and also you're still present, sitting. You're going to choose somebody. By the way, I want to share with you, as you can start seeing how I'm trying to catch my language, aren't I? Because I've been so able. I've been so heterosexual. You hear what I'm saying? So all of my language is having to learn. And guess what? I'm willing to do it. It's not like, why do we have to get so complicated? Why do we have to get... Well, that's what it is. I wanted people to learn Mun Wah. And so if I want people to learn Mun Wah and take the time, then I want to be able to honor someone else's difference. And the times they are a-changing, aren't they? And so what I'd like you to do is look around to somebody who's different than you. Interesting question. I was once in a room with 90% white men in the United States Coast Guard, and nobody moved. And then when I said, then I discovered that even though they were both white, one was French, Italian, one was born in Oklahoma, one was born in Kansas, one was older, one was younger. All these differences they didn't even look at because they just assumed they were all the same. So when you look around, it doesn't always have to, what students often do in class, they look for a person of color, you know, and that's really hard in America today because sometimes you only have 2. I remember it also when I was working with another company, I said, pair it with you know, gender and everything balanced, and there were only 2 women out of 500. But guess what? They went like this, oh my God, there's only 2 women. But what they had never looked at was that there were only 2. Or as one woman said to me once, I didn't know none of the presidents were women. Because she just took it for granted they were presidents. But she didn't notice she was missing. And I really want to be honest with you is, I was educated and trained to not notice I was missing either. How many of you know what I'm talking about? I was trained and educated that when I went out to look for a birthday card, a Christmas card, a graduation card, a funeral card, to not notice that I was missing on the cards. And when I wrote Hallmark, why aren't there more Asian people on your cards? You know what they said? Who's going to buy them? And I wrote back and I said, all my relatives. And all the ones that are coming. But what I wanted to share was, did you even notice they were missing? So that when we talk about that we're the melting pot, how many colors do we have in that pot that we actually see around us? Look around the room. This is your new try. You're going to meet another new person today. And if you want to get the right person, you better move fast. Ready, begin. Walk toward that person. And when you find your partner, have a seat. When you find your partner, raise your hand if you don't have a partner. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner, and keep it up. Keep it up until you find a partner. Sit down with your partner. Shh. Don't say anything. Sit down with your partner. Good. So everybody sit down with your partner. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner. Is anybody here without a partner? One. Anybody else not without a... Here's some people over here. And we have one other guy. He's coming down. Anybody else not have a partner? Would anybody... Do you have a partner? Is there anybody in a group of 3? Would anybody like to adopt this cute one here? Great. So why don't you sit? Oh, he's way up there. Got to watch out for these cameramen around here. All right. Now, everybody turn to face your partner. Now, of course, you already took the first workshop. Check your partner out. Take a good look at him. Just look at your partner. Don't say anything. Just look at what they're wearing. Just look at what they're wearing. Don't say a word. Shh. Don't say a word. Just look at what they're wearing. Now, I remember the first time I was a teacher, years ago. I was in Hunters Point, a mostly black school, and I wore this. Not this exact one. It's called a Tibetan shirt, because I didn't like to wear ties. I was very rebellious when I was younger. And I walked down into the courtyard, and the first little boy who was black saw me, and he went like this. Ha! And I looked at that little boy, and I said, not bad, grasshopper. I'll teach you some more moves after school. So pretty soon I was teaching all the kids moves after school. But then when I went to my classroom, I wrote down my name like every first-year teacher does. And then the biggest black kid, 12 years old, he must have been about 5'8". I was only like 5'4". At 5'8" or 10, he was big, and he was like almost 180 pounds. And he stood at the doorway like this, and he goes, I heard you thought you were tough. And I said, no, really, I didn't say anything like that. And then he goes, well, let's find out. And he ran full speed towards me. And I looked at him like this, like, and that's the martial arts look for fear. And as he was running towards me, he tripped on the first desk and knocked himself out on the file cabinet. And I went, oh my God, are you okay? And he goes, oh. I said, what's your name? He goes, Tom. I said, Tom, let me get the nurse. He goes, no. Don't tell anybody I tripped. Tell him you flipped me. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, I think I could do that. So it got around the whole school that Bruce Lee's brother was in the school. Now, for a while, it was fun and it was funny. But then I started to realize that that's all they saw me as. Just martial arts and doing this. But they didn't see the rest of me. And what I started to then understand is that no matter how positive the stereotype is, it doesn't see you. So whether positive or negative, it doesn't fully see who you are. And that we make assumptions every day by looking at people, don't we? I know that when you've looked at your partner, whether you say it or not, you've made some assumptions about them. Some people might go, oh, what if I say it? Well, the truth of it is, they can already see it in your eyes. Can you ever see in people's eyes when they're holding back what they want to say? Like, it kind of goes like this. I love everybody. I don't see color. I don't see gender. And I often say, are you blind or deaf? Or both? Like somebody once said to me, I don't see color. And so I've learned all these things to say, but then I finally learned a new one is, what happens if you did see color? Isn't that a good one? And then they say, well, you'd be hurt. And I'd say, well, I am Chinese. He is black. He is Latino. I am gay. I am older. I am younger. What's wrong to see a person as you see them? And today what I want you to practice on going is what I see, but also your assumptions that go with it. Can you hear that? So when they looked at me, or whatever, he must be doing martial arts. Or maybe my good friend over here who I met today, it might be he's got a lot of hair. And he might go, I'm scared. I'm nervous. Is he a musician? All these things. And guess what? So you could say, my assumption is you must be a musician, you must be wild or whatever, a soccer player, all these things. And then you can go, is it true? And he could go, no. I got a crew cut underneath this. No. But underneath, he could say, where'd you get that from? And so you could talk about it. Can you hear that? So you finally get those assumptions out. I want to do this in Ferguson where the white police officers face with a black young man and go, there are assumptions of them. And vice versa, but also to hear why young black men are afraid of the police. So it's not just, I'm not like that, but their experiences with them. How many have ever been betrayed? Been betrayed. How many of you have ever had that person come and say, hey, forgive me, I won't do it again? And then they do it again. And then you decide, that's it, two's enough. Or maybe you're one of those people that stays in it. But that's what betrayal is. And if it happens to you enough, you don't want to have anything to do with the person. I think that's what racism and sexism and homophobia is about. You have enough experiences, and after a while, you don't trust that a person wants to see you, fully you. And so I strongly believe it's really important for you to hear the person going is, when I hear you say that, it reminds me of 1,000 other times I've had people say that to me. Then you get to hear the impact. Can you hear that? Intent and impact. You may have good intentions, but your impact is it hurts. And it's important to find it out. You're not going to die if you tell the person tells you, what you said was painful, but then ask them, tell me what has happened. Tell me what I said and why it's painful. Which I think is what Kevin's also talking about, isn't he? That when people have disabilities, what kind of stereotypes that we pile onto them daily. Or when that Donald Trump was talking about that one woman who is deaf, and he said she's a retard. And that's exactly the name that we give people. And that's what he's talking about is, do you see me? Just because I can't hear, just because I have a disability, doesn't mean that you could pile on that I'm not intelligent, I'm uncivilized, I can't hear, I'm invisible. Just because I'm old doesn't mean I've lost all my senses, that I don't have something valuable to say. So all of that is what we carry in our heads and we need to talk about with each other. So what I'd like you to do is this. I want you to tell your partner when you look at them, and you can make all sorts of assumptions, okay? So you can look at Ray and say, when I see your necklace, I wonder if you're just one cool dude who is just a philosopher from the mountains, okay? And he'd go, well, yes, I am. No, or he could say, I wear these because I got them from someone. And the same thing, he'll look at your necklace, and he could make an assumption about you. All these could be operated. The only way you can break assumptions is to check them out. They could be true, and you could talk to them, where did it come from, huh? All right, to turn to your partner, take a breath. You're going to live through this. And the person is going to begin will be the elder in your group will start off with one assumption they made about you, and then they're going to check out to see if it's true, okay? All right, ready, begin. Okay, so how many of you that your assumptions were right? How many of you, some of them are right? How many of you were afraid to tell people your assumptions? How many of you were afraid to hear their assumptions of you? Yeah. How many of you believe that assumptions can sometime affect whether or not you get hired. How many of you believe that sometimes assumptions can have people think that you're not smart, that you're not trustworthy, educated? Yeah. So until we check our assumptions out, they operate. And until we start modeling for our children to check out our assumptions. There's an exercise that I do that, unfortunately, I don't have two chairs up here, but I sit pretending that I'm in a theater with my children. And a black man walks up and he sits next to me. And then I take my belongings and push it over here. And then I turn my seat and move as far away as I can. And that's exactly what my father did. I learned about racism without him saying a single word. I watched my father, when black people came into his restaurant, make them wait up to an hour to eat. And perhaps the worst one that I saw my father do is when they came in, he spit in their food and put pepper so they wouldn't stay. Until finally the black folks got the hint and only did takeout. How did he come to that place? Because white folks told my father, I'm so glad you don't have those folks in your restaurant. And that's how he slowly learned it. How did I learn it as a child? Oh, Mun Wah, I'm so glad to have you, your sisters and brothers in here, not like those other kids here. And she looked right up at the black students. You see, and sometimes it was, why can't those people be like your people? Why can't blacks be more like Asians? And that was slowly another way of saying, let me use you to put another group down. And then the drift or the huge gap of distrust between blacks and Asians. Or as one black man said to me in the middle of my workshop, we fought for the civil rights and you got all the prizes. We fought for affirmative action and white women are the number one benefactors of affirmative action. How many of you know exactly what I'm talking about? Raise your hand. And what that does to divide us. There is no competition for pain. There is no competition for who's more unjustly. And that's what we end up doing, isn't it? How come we don't bring up disabilities and we only bring up racism? We fight each other rather than why aren't we taking care of each other?
My experience is when you have a bunch of people with different disabilities, almost always there's an unspoken people that are thinking about who has it worse.
Yes,
Why
exactly.
is yours worse than yours?
Exactly.
It's amazing.
And even with the Asian community, American-born, immigrant-born, suburban neighborhoods, Chinatown, we all end up not learning to work together, and that's what happens when you have very little resources. In your communities, you need to start looking at that and what it does to people who have less, is forcing them to fight each other for such little things. So now I'd like you to look up at the screen. Virginia Satir, a very famous therapist, said, what we do not understand, we make up. That's called the Donald Trump newest saying. Now, poor Donald, he's getting all of my jokes lately. I remember somebody once said to me, Mun Wah, what are the people in China doing today? And I said, I'm not Sarah Palin, I can't see that far. All right, enough of my commentary. All right. And this one's called Differences Exercise. It is, when did you first notice you were different? How did that affect you? And how does it affect you today? Can you hear that? As a woman, gay, trans, Latino, older, younger. But even if you put in older, younger, put in your ethnicity, your gender, and your age when people look at you, because it all changes, doesn't it? And that's why today, when I was talking about the young child, it will change for that child. Sadly so, won't it? And that's why I wanted to embellish it into your minds. Why is that child so beautiful at this age and dangerous to you later on? Turn to your partner. And the person who will begin this time will be the person who has the most jewelry on. This guy's saying, I don't have any jewelry. Okay. And you will answer, when did you first notice you were different as a Latina, younger, as a woman, okay? How did it affect you and how does it affect you today? Ready, begin. You get 5 minutes. Oh, everybody, only one person's talking, and then I'll ring the bell and we'll switch, okay? Do not both answer the question. The other person is simply listening and not saying a single thing, just listening while the person answers these questions, okay? Good. Ready, begin. Okay, so as we did earlier, I would like you now to look back at your partner. And by the way, I'd like to propose to you, every time someone says something to you, especially if it's a story or they're traumatized, after they talk, don't rush in to say something. Try learning to do this. Just pause and taking in what they said, feeling what they said. As a therapist, sometimes I can go a whole session simply by doing this. Aha. That'll be $50 more. No, I'm just kidding. They don't even give you a full hour. They just give you 50 minutes. All right. Okay, it's good to laugh at your own profession. Okay, so look back at your partner and think of 2 or 3 things that they said that was important to them. Can you hear that? Not what was important to you, but what was important to them. And then what you're going to do is, you're going to learn to use the questions that you learned earlier, which is, what I heard you say was use their first name and say, I was moved or I was touched when you talked about. And you'd be amazed if you get the right one, they'll just keep on talking. And if you find out your partner keeps on talking, you should consider being a therapist someday. You're doing really good. Now, being a good listener is not doing this. You think you had it bad. Let me tell you what happened to me. That is not a good listener. How many have ever heard that one? Yes. And then you sit there listening to them. So really trying to give you some good ones. Now, the other one is sometimes just tell me more. What angered you? What hurt you? Now, I do not believe that anger is a primary emotion. I think hurt is. When hurt is unacknowledged or invalidated, it becomes anger. So really the work of this country is learning how to hear the hurt, to value it, to be curious about it. And this is the one that I taught mediators all over the world, around the world, was the past tense question, which is, what's familiar about this? In other words, I do not believe in conflict resolution. I believe in conflict facilitation. And the reason why is, I think when people start telling you their issues, it's just the tip of the iceberg. This is not the first time. And so when you start to ask, how did that affect you way back then? How does it affect you now? That's how you go deeper into how the past affects you. I can definitely tell you when Ray was talking about the American Indians and about their diversity to welcome everyone. Well, they also have all these stories of how they were killed, feet cut off, when they tried to speak their language in their schools, of the white people's schools, how their mouths were filled with soap, how they were beaten to speak their own language. And so they have a trail of tears. So what's familiar to them and how that affected them and how it affects them today, it means that it'll take a lot for them to trust again. But first you have to hear the tears. Can you hear that? I remember a black parent came in to a white teacher and said, "You are not going to teach my child." And the white teacher said, but I'm a good teacher, and I love kids, and I work with all different kids. And she said, no. And then finally I worked with the white teacher to ask the black mother, tell me what happened, why you don't. And the mother told her a story of what she went through as a child with white teachers. And then this is what the white teacher said after she heard the story. Now I don't blame you. No wonder you don't want a white teacher to teach your child. And she had tears in her eyes. And then the black mother looked at her and said, now you can teach my child. Do you see that? Now you can teach my child because you understand what it has taken for my child to get here. Not like any other child. And I think we have to hear the stories, don't we? You could hear it in Ray's voice, couldn't you? The deep sorrow that he carried as he said that. And so you need to sit with the sorrow and the hurt. Become a good witness to someone else's story. And if you do, you become a part of their story, not an obstacle or a wall. Ready, begin. Okay, there you go. As you can tell, this is my newest practicing Buddhist intern. What Tony doesn't know is that we're going to shave his head just after dinner. Let's give him a hand. Okay. So how many of you thought your partner was a good listener? Good. Now turn around and tell them why you thought they were a good listener and what did they do to give you that feeling. Ready, begin. Okay, now if you were the listener, tell your partner what you appreciated and were touched by their story. Ready, begin. Okay, so now switch seats with your partner. Sit in their seat, you sit in their seat. Okay. It's kind of like that old saying, you know, walking in someone else's moccasins. But now you get to see what it feels like to have to share your story, okay? So once again, look at the screen, and you are going to answer these questions. When did you first notice you were different? Ready, begin. Okay. So once again, how many of you appreciated getting to know your partner? You better say that, huh? So I would like to ask you this. Earlier I asked you I asked some folks, what was the definition of diversity? A lot of it had to do with respecting differences, etc. Please raise your hand that when you discovered you were different, it was a loving, nurturing experience. Now take a good look, everyone. One person raised their hand. Two. When I was taking my family therapy class, the teacher said this: how many of you, when you were growing up, experienced the peaceful resolution of conflict in your family on a daily basis? And no one raised their hands. And one person said, my parents never argued, but they divorced when we were 12. And what did I learn about conflict? When my parents would fight behind doors. And I never saw my mother scream at my dad, but she would come downstairs on Sunday morning knowing he was sleeping, and she would slam every shelf door. And that's the only way my father knew she was pissed, and he never came out of that room. But I learned that anger wasn't a good thing, and I never got to see it. And I think that there's something about differences. The reason why I said to you is that I think that we celebrate differences, but we don't practice it. And this is, I hope that what you got today is when you learn someone's differences, and you learn that people are still struggling, that it wasn't okay to be who they were, and how it affected them. And we were just talking about that with another couple over here earlier. When I discovered that I was different, I was ashamed. When I discovered that my accent was not American, I remembered it really well that my father had a Chinese accent, and my younger brother was on the bed jumping up and down, and he was facing me, and I was facing the door. We were only like 8 years old. And my brother started imitating my father's accent, only very disrespectfully. And as we were jumping up and down, I thought it was funny. I didn't know. And then I saw my father come to the doorway. And he didn't say a word. I don't think he even knew that his accent wasn't beautiful. That his children would someday be ashamed of his beautiful Cantonese accent. He never said a word. And I never forgot the look on his face. That is why when I taught, or when I do this work, and someone has a beautiful accent, I say, what a beautiful accent. Everybody, raise your hand if you think it's so beautiful. So they get to hear the words. As a woman said to me who lived in Nigeria, look at me. I am a beautiful black flower. And I had never heard that of a black person in this country. I am a beautiful black flower. And our long history has said just the opposite, hasn't it? And how at any given moment you could change the way someone sees themselves. I think it's sad that we think that only French and Australian and English accents are beautiful. I think all of the way we share and talk about ourselves and express ourselves is beautiful. I remember an Indian woman when the chancellor of the college and her child who came to the college was molested. And she was very upset. And the president of the college said, we are doing everything we can. And of course, I knew he didn't. And the woman from India, the mother from India said, you do know you are talking with two tongues. And I thought, perfect. And I looked at the president and I said, pay attention. Because some part of you lied to her. And either you own up to it and take responsibility that in fact you haven't followed up. And that's what I wanted to say to Delta. I wanted to say to Southwest Airlines. Don't just follow up and give someone air miles. Tell the country you did something wrong. Have the people who did that stand up and say, it was racist what I said. Don't fire them. Teach them so they could teach others. And along the way, I want to say to Delta and Southwest, pilots do not have the power to kick people off planes just because of what they wear and how they sound and how they look. And the airline people who are in that plane need to say something, not just watch it. We all do. I want to have you turn to your partner and now thank them in any way you want. Ready, begin. You're such a touchy-feely group. So now what I'd like you to do, I think, Carmen, where are you? Carmen wanted to share something. And I want to tell you that tonight I'm going to be showing my film, and she's going to announce what we're going to do next. And tonight I'm going to be showing my film, Last Chance for Eden. Let's give a big hand for all the folks who've worked so hard to put this together. And I wish to thank all of you. I remembered Mother Teresa said once, toward the end of her life, perhaps we have no peace is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And we surely do. Thank you.